Yeah, so I've always been a music guy, and I got into music very young, about the age of 5. That's when I bought my first record, which was Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, and I mentioned that in the book. And that turned me on to pop music, basically. And so for the next 10 years, I was listening to pretty much anything that was in the charts and just soaking it all up and absorbing what was on the radio. And looking back at it now with the benefit of hindsight and with a heightened level of consciousness, it really does seem to me like I was destined to be somebody that would spend my life listening to music, so that at this key point in my life, I could start talking about what I now am talking about, and that it laid the foundations for the book that I've just put out. I really do feel that the universe has a way of placing us right where we need to be and giving us the kind of lives that we need in order to gain the experiences that we came here to gain and to learn the lessons. And a lot of spiritual mediums and such will tell you that we actually make these decisions in a higher state of consciousness before we incarnate into this reality. So, there's our higher selves, aspects of the Godhead or the divine or whatever you want to call it, that make the decision to have the kind of lives that we eventually come in and have. And as I've gone on over the last few years and come to some of these great understandings, I've realised how this has certainly been the case in my life. So there we were, back with Bohemian Rhapsody, which put me on to music generally. And then about 10 years later, in my teenage years, I kind of fine-tuned my tastes and got into the black music of the time. This was like hip-hop that was coming through in the mid-80s, and the soul and funk that was around, and then early dance music as it kind of morphed into house and that whole dance music scene. I was right there to be into all of that and to be swept along with it. And I decided that I wanted to become a DJ. And I'm giving people the potted version here. I won't bore you with the long version, but I don't want to make it sound easy, because it was a struggle and it was a hustle, most definitely, and I had a lot of issues that I had to overcome. But eventually I made it as a DJ, and I was able to start doing radio shows and start doing gigs. And over the course of the last 25 years, I've been fortunate enough to DJ in about 40 different countries. I've been to the US a few times. I've done various radio shows and stuff. So, it's been pretty good. And I still do DJ, but I've toned it right down, and I've pulled right back on the number of gigs that I do, because the sort of stuff that I'm now talking about and exposing that goes on in the music industry, and the sort of artists that I'm calling out, and the sort of record labels that I'm calling out, it would be very hypocritical of me to continue in the same vein that I was before, playing and exposing these artists, with one hand, if with the other hand I'm going out and doing public talks and putting books out, exposing all the nefarious, insidious stuff that goes on behind the scene. So in many ways, the research work that I now do has affected my work as a DJ, in that I can't be out there like I was before. But I don't want to be, because I've come to these realizations of the true nature of the corporate music industry and who's really running it and what the agenda is. And when you come to understand all that stuff, why would you want to continue to be a part of it? Why would you want to continue oiling the cogs in the machine and, facilitating all this stuff? I certainly don't want to. So my life now is very different to how it was a few years ago. And if you told me 5 years ago that I'd be out here talking about the stuff that I am and putting books out and doing public talks and podcasts, I wouldn't have believed you. I'd have told you to get out of here. But it is what it is. And, we all get on our path if we choose to follow the signs and follow what's been laid out for us. And I really do feel like I'm on my path now and I'm where I need to be. So here we are talking about all this stuff. And so the book is now out, and where do you want to go with it, Jeff? I mean, there's so many subject areas in it. There's so many aspects of what happens in the industry. Take your pick.
Well, I'm already just shaking with, I don't know, I feel this is going to be a healing conversation for a lot of people, including me. You're preaching to the choir on so many things you said. I was just like, it's like a pinball machine. A lot of bells. I felt like Tommy, a lot of bells going off as you were talking. The first thing I just want to note is, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, where the Ohio Players are from, and they were really the ones for me that gave us back there the permission. Like, you can be from Dayton, Ohio, and make it in the music business. And I love James Brown, and I had a singer that worked in a record store, so I got the first Prince album when he came out, and I always loved the funk and the soul and all that stuff. So the fact that you're into that as well is amazing. And the point that you mentioned at the end is exactly where I'm at right now as we're recording our new, album. We're doing it on vinyl to 2-inch. And I'm sitting here trying to negotiate, trying to navigate, because, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I can't exactly go into any other profession here at this point. I'm about to celebrate a birthday here on March 31st, along with Angus Young, and again, I still believe music can heal. We've got a difficult industry to try to put that out there, And I think back to folks like Bob Marley, who's one of my mentors, and that kind of frequency and lyric content, not necessarily that welcome this day and age in the music industry. So again, we've put a bit out on the show to begin with. Maybe we talk about, from your perspective, because I kind of set it up, when did you discover and how did the veil kind of start to pull back for you? As far as the music industry goes, when you said, okay, I'm not in Kansas anymore. And even though in the music business, you're always in Oz, now it's something even beyond that.
Yeah, well, I was a slow learner. I didn't really come to a full realization of what's going on until about 6 years ago. But there were lots of signs that kind of led me to that point before that. So I've always been somebody that has asked the big questions in life. I've always been someone that's reflected on things that are really important, like our true nature. What are we doing here? What is this place? Who are we? What's going on in the world? Is there a God? If so, what's the purpose to creation? Pretty big questions like that. The sort of thing you don't normally hear talked about around the water cooler at work or with the guys down at the pub. I've always been somebody that's asked those questions and spent time musing on them. And my dad is somebody that's had a big influence on me because he's always been somebody that's asked those questions as well. And as far back as I can remember, he's just been sat there in his armchair late at night reading books and going to the window and looking up at the stars and wondering what it's all about. And so he obviously got me on that path and used to speak to me about it when I was quite young. So all through my life, I've been somebody that's tended to look beneath the surface. And if there's more to know about a situation, I have to know it. I have to know the truth of something. It doesn't matter how ugly or unsettling or disturbing it might be. If there's truth to be known, I've got to know it. So I guess that's what put me in an ideal kind of position to follow all the clues that were coming across my radar. And by about 2008, I'd started to realise the world was nothing like we'd spent our lives being told it was. The government-approved official version of everything. I'd started to read the books of David Icke, and they were very paradigm-shattering, And I came across the first Zeitgeist movie, and I was put onto that by a very well-known DJ, actually, funnily enough, by the name of Danny Rampling, who's a very well-known dance music DJ in the UK. He and I were doing this gig in Riga, Latvia in 2008, and our flight home got delayed by 24 hours. So we were holed up in this airport for ages, and we got talking about stuff, and he put me onto this movie, Zeitgeist. And that was a real world changer as well. I'm sure people are familiar with that. And then by 2010... I underwent what I refer to as my conscious awakening, which is where all these different pieces just seemed to fit together instantly, and the jigsaw puzzle suddenly made sense. I could see the big picture, and it's all these little bits of information and little tidbits and little clues that up to that point had seemed entirely unrelated, but suddenly I could see how they all connected into each other. And my specialist area of interest from that point on was the corporate music industry, and understanding how that had been used as part of the overall agenda for what's going on in the world. And what I'm talking about is the devastating realization that the world is not controlled by the people we're told it is. It's not politicians. Obama is not the most powerful man in America. You realize that there are individuals and networks of secret societies behind the scenes that have all these individuals in their pockets, so-called world leaders, and then so-called business leaders and celebrities and all the rest of it. You realize that the world is actually being controlled and the shots are being called from behind the veil. And so I needed to understand the nature of that and how that all worked. And I came to realise that the vast majority of us have spent our entire lives being brainwashed and mind-controlled and having our perceptions of the world and our perceptions of selves shaped and moulded for us on a subconscious basis. And we've had no idea that it's going on. And this has been done by way of the things we're taught in schools, the things that government ministers tell us, the things that mainstream news bulletins tell us, and beyond that, all the symbolism and the imagery and the ideas and the values that we've absorbed into our subconscious minds through a lifetime of watching Hollywood movies, TV shows, and music videos, and music live stage shows. So I really needed to understand how the music business was used as part of this overall process, because I realised I'd been duped and conned and made a mug of. And that was a pretty world-shattering, devastating thing for me, because I don't like being made a mug of. And when I discovered that it's happened, I want to know the tactics that were used against me so that I can understand how I was taken off guard. And so I threw myself into study and research in this area. And the first aspect of it that came across my radar was all the dark occult symbolism that had been going into music videos in the contemporary age. So I started out looking at music videos from the likes of Jay-Z, Kanye West, Beyonce, Rihanna, Katy Perry, Lady Gaga, Britney Spears, those sort of artists. And straight away I could see how certain ideas and perceptions had been planted into the minds of the general public via these artists, and the fact that these artists, far from being creative maverick spirits expressing themselves freely, were in fact manipulated stooges absolutely in the control of the industry and those that pull its strings. So people look at somebody like Jay-Z and they will make the statement that he's a wildly creative individual artist. And you come to realise that that's absolutely not the case. Being somebody that DJ'd in the hip-hop arena, it was of special interest to me to look at these artists, because I'd spent some time really looking up to Jay-Z and admiring him. Same thing with Kanye West when he first came out. And to come to the understanding that they were being used for this very dark agenda was a pretty shattering thing, And there's a lot of denial. Denial runs very deep. It did for me to start with when it came to the hip-hop area. I talk about how the Beatles and the Rolling Stones were used back in the 1960s for another part of the same agenda. And when you speak to a lot of people that were around in those years, there's some very heavy denial. And they get very defensive and very aggressive when you suggest that the Beatles and the Rolling Stones might not be all they appeared to be, and that there might be more to know. You get the same thing with Elvis Presley. I did a public talk just this week, and the suggestion came up in the talk that Elvis may have faked his death, and that he may have been working in league with military intelligence and various arms of the US government and police departments and such. And there was this one guy, a sort of rockabilly 50s rocker guy, that wasn't having any of it, and he got very angry with the suggestion, and he was raising his voice and getting very upset about it. So, like I say, the denial runs very deep, and everyone has an emotional attachment to some artist or other, and for them to hear the suggestion that that artist may not have been all that they thought they was is going to meet with that kind of response. So it's a difficult job getting this information out there in many ways, but I think a lot of people can see it, really. A lot of people understand that the world really is nothing like the way we thought it was, particularly in recent years. It's becoming more and more obvious. The signs and the indicators are everywhere you look, and all you've got to be is somebody with an open mind that is prepared to go wherever the truth takes them, with no ulterior motives, no belief systems to defend, and you'll discover the truth about these things. It's available right there now in these times for anyone that wants to discover it. We live in the era of the internet. It's the greatest gift, the greatest technological gift to humanity, in my view, because everything you need to know and everything you need to understand about great truths is right there on the internet. Obviously, there's a whole load of BS. Obviously, there's a whole load of disinformation and garbage on the internet as well. So it is a process of discernment, of sifting out the good information from all the dross. But it is possible to do that, and it's not been in previous ages. So those of us alive today with this capability at our fingertips have an incredible gift to break free of the deception, break free of the mind control spells that have been cast on us, and to get on the path to truth. And that needs to happen with large numbers of people all around the world right now. And that's where the solution lies. Because otherwise, expect more of the same. I've had enough. I'm sure you've had enough. Let's change it. Let's switch it up.
Indeed. Now, I mean, there's so many tangents I could go off on everything you're saying, but I want to stay focused.
That's
here.
why I say, where do you want to go? Because we got like 20 different subject areas, so maybe we should just pick 2 or 3.
Well, this is the thing: is like that dude with the rockabilly dude, man. There's no one that the Beatles are more ingrained in than me. My first album my parents gave me was the Beatles. I've grown up. I love the Beatles. Nothing that I've learned makes me love them any less. Again, it's perspective. But I've come out on my show, and I don't know what people even make of what I say. Or when I come straight out, I say, look, the Beatles were a mind control experiment of the Tavistock Institute. Mm-hmm. Google it, look it up. Just
certainly appears to be the case.
Then I play a Beatles song. So.
Well, I mean,
why don't we take it back? Because here's where I'm like, if we take it back to like Robert Johnson, he's a guy in a hotel room, and some businessman, whoever that was smart enough to know, if I take Robert Johnson in this hotel room and record him, I can make money off this. This dumb guitar player, right? So it started there. Not that he was the first guy, but whoever recorded the first artist, it started somewhere, and the whole thing has evolved and devolved and now into the downward spiral that it is. And it's all based around greed and exploitation and power, false power, manipulation of false power, and all the stuff that we'll dive into. But let's go back as far as you can take the people back, how the industry started evolving, into this, let's say, dark area, because it's always been there. I mean, I have ads, and let's get off the music industry, but the predictive program has always been there. This stuff has always been an undercurrent. It just was more subversive, because that's how anything grows. Any momentum grows from an undercurrent. So I have ads that I'm sharing with people in truth groups that have advertisements from the 1970s with foreshadowing and predictive programming of 9/11, which was planned 30 years before it happened, which was planned before those buildings were even built, the fake Hollywood set facade that they are, with no floors at the top, those hollow buildings. So not to get off on the tangent, but here we are, how did this all begin to weave itself in? I mean, and it's the people who are it's the guys who run the music industry. And I mean, we're going to end up, you can't have this discussion, and I'm not shy about talking about Freemasons and Zionists, and that Hollywood is a Zionist run deal, and that the U.S. is a Freemason creation all the way down the line, from the Pilgrims all the way down. Washington, just keep going.
That's right.
So,
well, I've traced it back as far as the 1950s, pretty much. I'm sure you can go back further. You mentioned Robert Johnson. We're going back to like the 1930s with that dude. And there's this legend that's always surrounded Robert Johnson, the idea that he sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads, which is the origin of his famous song Crossroads. And a lot of people think that the idea of selling your soul to the devil for fame and fortune is this mythological, legendary kind of fable. But I would suggest that there's actually a lot of truth in that statement, and that this is exactly what goes on, yes, metaphorically, but also literally in many ways, with pretty much all the A-list artists that get elevated right to the top of the game. So there's a reason why the likes of Elvis Presley and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Elton John and David Bowie and Duran Duran, I guess, taking it back to the 80s, and Madonna and Prince, sorry to say, and Jay-Z and Britney Spears. There's a reason why these artists end up in these prominent positions, because they are the ones that have been prepared to do whatever it takes to endear themselves to these forces that control the industry. And they get this engineered fame and fortune, in exchange for what it is that they do. And at any given time, there's a vacancy for like the number one rapper, the number one rock group, the number one girl pop singer. And what they do is just simply slot names into these positions. So for many years, Britney Spears was like that number one girl pop singer. Then she started having a few problems with the mind control programming wearing off, and she went a bit crazy. So they kind of shuffled her out of position and shuffled Lady Gaga in. And now they seem to be shuffling Miley Cyrus into that position, because Lady Gaga's starting to get a bit outspoken and maybe she's not playing the game the way she used to. And so they just discard these artists whenever their time is up, and they move somebody else into the position. And with the Beatles, I'm of the view that they were very much a product of the 1960s, and they were used for mass mind control and social engineering programs, and to pretty much brainwash an entire generation that was around at that time. And they occurred in tandem with all these other major social changes that were taking place in the 1960s. So we had the emergence of the Vietnam War, we had the arrival of LSD on the scene, acid everywhere, kids turning on, tuning in, dropping out, tripping on acid. We had all those artists that came out of Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, the hippie counterculture movement in the latter half of the 1960s. You had the arrival of the contraceptive birth control pill and all the sexual emancipation that brought, that kind of dictated the social freedoms of an entire generation. You had the incoming age of Aquarius at that time that was talked about, giving a kind of spiritual, esoteric element to it all. You had all the other stuff that was happening in the 60s, the JFK and Bobby Kennedy assassinations, or fake assassinations, psyops, depending on your viewpoint on those. You had Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the Apollo faked moon landings. So it was such a decade of change, and I think the Beatles were very much intended to be a part of that, and that's why their music changed so radically in the latter half of the 1960s. So the sort of stuff they first came out with, She Loves You, Please Please Me, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Twist and Shout, all these innocent sort of blues, rock and roll love songs, basically. Round about 1966, their music started to become very psychedelic and very experimental, and went off down an entirely different path. And this was happening exactly in tandem with what was happening with so many other artists on both sides of the Atlantic. So you had this psychedelic era emerging in the UK and in the US, and I don't think that could have been by accident. It was all part of an orchestrated plan, because the forces that control the UK music industry are the same as those which control the US. They all feed into the same control points when you go high enough up the power pyramid. So the Beatles were very much used as a part of that. And it got to 1969, and that decade was done, and the agenda was pretty much achieved in terms of what they wanted to do with that entire generation and the kind of attitudes and perceptions they wanted to place in the collective consciousness. And so the Beatles were retired, and off they went to do their solo careers, and then a new generation of groups and acts were kind of ushered in for the 1970s. So it ties into what I was saying about these artists have a planned shelf life, and when they're up, somebody else gets moved into position. When you look at the control mechanism that we have, And you realise that the forces that I'm talking about control governments and so-called world leaders, the world of politics, inside out. They control all the big corporations around the world. They control military. They control the world of science and scientism. They control the world of academia, schools, colleges, and all the information that gets put out through those institutions. They've got the mainstream media absolutely locked down. So if they've taken the time and trouble and energy to hijack and direct all these different walks of life and all these ways of these methods through which people get their information and their perceptions of what's going on in the world, why the hell would they leave out the entertainment industry? Why would they pass up the opportunity to get right into the minds and the very spirits of the global population that exists through Hollywood movies and the music industry? Everyone likes music of some form. It might be classical, it might be opera, it might be country, but whatever it is, everyone you meet, from the smallest infant to a 100-year-old, is going to like some kind of music. And the thing about people's favourite music is they go to it, they seek it out. So if music is being used as a method of mind control and social manipulation, they don't even have to dump it on you. They don't even have to coerce you into buying into all this stuff, because people seek it out. They go for their favourite groups, they go to their concerts, they buy their records, and they lap it up. You know, it's very attractive to people. So it's a wonderful opportunity if you're a dark controller with malevolent intent towards humanity, and you've got this subversive kind of agenda in mind. It's just a fantastic opportunity to reach large numbers of people. And of course, this is what's been going on pretty much since the early days of the industry on both sides of the Atlantic. And many researchers are of the view that these very industries were set up with that aim in mind. So right from the days of Bill Haley and the Comets and, you know, Little Richard and Elvis Presley, going right back to the 1950s, it was always in mind with these corporations that their favourite artists, the tried and tested chosen ones, would be used as part of this agenda that they had in mind, tying into all these other aspects of society, the mainstream media and stuff that you hear from governments and the political agenda. These industries would always be used for those purposes. So when you expand your consciousness enough, and when you're prepared to accept that the world is nothing like the version of events you get on a CNN news bulletin, then you start to understand that, yes, of course they wouldn't have left it to chance. Look how big the Beatles were. Look at the sway and the influence they had. Look at how many millions of people around the world they affected on an emotional, spiritual level. They would not leave that to chance. They would not leave a group to just organically, naturally evolve to the kind of power that the Beatles had. And the same could be said for Elvis Presley and the Rolling Stones and any number of other groups you want to name. They would not leave that to chance. They would want to be in control of that situation. And of course, that's exactly what happened. And one of the really devastating things, which I get into in my book, and which many other researchers have, is when you delve into the true family backgrounds of many of these prominent artists, the vast majority of them, in fact, time and time again, you find family links to military intelligence, the CIA, or maybe the FBI, or various aspects of the government departments, or the secret services. And this happens in the UK. It ties into MI5, MI6, GCHQ, and the army and the military forces. And it happens in the US as well. Time and time again, you find family backgrounds linked into the CIA and secret services there as well. So it goes way beyond the realms of probability and chance. And I've made the point in previous interviews, if the fathers of so many prominent rock musicians from through the years just happen to be, let's say, lorry drivers or beer brewers, people would find it very strange. And they'd say, well, why is it that so many rock stars' dads have been lorry drivers? Why is this? And yet, with so many of the dads of these famous musicians just happening to come from military intelligence and the secret services, people don't tend to ask that question as if it's just completely normal. There should be no links whatsoever between military intelligence and the world of music if music is what we're told it is. It's a fun, leisurely activity. It's this attractive, fun way for people to just spend their leisure time and, enjoy themselves, have a party, have a good time. If that really was the case, there should be no connections whatsoever into all this stuff. And also, when you scratch the surface, you find connections to dark, occult, ritual practices everywhere. Satanism, Luciferianism, ties back into Freemasonry, as you mentioned. Again, why should this be the case if music is all about fun and leisure? Why is there so much dark occult symbolism everywhere? Why is there ritual stuff everywhere? There should be no connection at all.
Why does every country artist Freemason hand signing from all the way back, Buck Owens and Dolly Parton on Hee Haw, all the way up to Keith Urban and who's the judge on The Voice, Blake Shelton.
Yeah.
Every single country artist, without exception, is a Freemason. Go look in the photo album on Music Without Boundaries radio show on Facebook right now.
Yes,
there's a photo album called The Music Business is Whack, Yo. Go in there and look. I could have put 1,000 country artists. I got bored uploading pictures.
Yep.
Every single one of them hand signing.
Yeah.
Now let's also jump back. Let's name names, because I know some of these military kids. Let's start naming names. Jim Morrison, Jimi Hendrix, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. Keep going. You can add to the list, right?
Pretty much all those artists emerged out of Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles in the mid to late 60s. This is the work
Zappa, for crying out loud.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the work of Dave McGowan, the great researcher and author who sadly passed away last year on the 22nd of November, died of cancer, apparently. And he was the foremost kind of researcher in recent years into the family backgrounds of all these artists that came out of that scene, the hippie counterculture scene at the tail end of the 60s. And we've been led to believe through the official account of things that scene was this organic grassroots thing that just kind of grew up naturally, and it was very much in defiance of the Vietnam War that was just starting out at the time, and it was all these artists that were anti-establishment and wanted to make these statements that went against the grain of the establishment, and so this whole folk rock scene just grew up out of this canyon in Los Angeles where there'd been no kind of musical activity at all prior to that. But McGowan, in his web series and the book that he put out, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, in 2014, got into the family backgrounds of many of these artists. Well, pretty much all of them, actually. Pretty much every single key player that came out of that scene. The classic one is always Jim Morrison and his dad, Admiral George Stephen Morrison, who just happens to have been the naval commander in charge of the fleet of ships that was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, later shown to be another false flag orchestrated hoax, but it was used to springboard America into the Vietnam War. Jim Morrison's dad was the guy that caused that to happen. And yet you've got Jim Morrison held up as this kind of iconic rock god who's the poster boy for the anti-war generation. And as McGowan pointed out to me, you don't find a stranger juxtaposition between father and son than between those two. And then he got into the background of Frank Zappa, and he revealed that Frank Zappa's father was involved in chemical bioweapons research, and he worked out at the Edgewood Arsenal military base where Zappa was actually born. And he also revealed that Frank Zappa's wife, Gail Slopeman, knew Jim Morrison when they were like 5 years old. They went to a military naval kindergarten together. And then 20 years later, they emerge out of this Laurel Canyon scene with Jim Morrison as this iconic, larger-than-life rock god, and Gail Slopeman as the wife of another larger-than-life iconic rock god in Frank Zappa. And the connections go on and on and on in that scene. John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas, all of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, all the other big groups that came out of that scene. There's connections into the Eagles, the Beach Boys. It goes into Buffalo Springfield, Captain Beefheart. Joni Mitchell was connected to that scene. Neil Young. So many others that I've forgotten, but pretty much all the major acts out of there. And then you can get into the background of Brian Jones, the founder member of the Rolling Stones. Before Mick and Keith, there was Brian Jones, who got the whole group going. And he has governmental military connections through his father, who was an aeronautical engineer for various aspects of the British government, and they moved to Cheltenham, that whole family, out of Wales, and Cheltenham is where GCHQ is based, Government Communication Headquarters, which is like the UK's version of the NSA, involved in spying and surveillance. So Brian Jones's dad was a part of that. Cliff Richard's dad. So much to say about Cliff Richard at the moment in terms of various investigations into his private life. And it turns out Cliff Richard's dad worked for Thorn EMI, which, as well as being a recording company, also had interests in weapons manufacturing, weapons research for use in military warfare and such, as did many of the recording companies at that time, Decca and so many of these other prominent record labels. Another thing that I heard McGowan talking about in an interview was Miles Copeland, who's a big-time career CIA man. He's the father of Stuart Copeland, who was the founder member of the group The Police. And he revealed that Miles Copeland had 3 sons, and each of them started up a music operation. The 2 others had music distribution and management companies, and I forget the actual names of the companies, but the abbreviations of them break down as FBI.
My friend, Megadeth, when I was in Megadeth, our booking agent was FBI Miles Copeland.
Okay.
So I crossed his path often.
Yeah, so one of the companies was, the initials break down as FBI, and then the other company, the initials break down as IRS. And then you've got Stuart Copeland starting The Police. So you've got this CIA guy and his sons run FBI, IRS and The Police. It's not like they don't give us the odd sign and let us know what's going on. And the connections go into so many other artists, military backgrounds everywhere you look. Unfortunately, connections to paedophilia everywhere you look as well. Connections to Satanism and dark occult practices, as I say. Many of the acts of the 60s, there are connections when you follow the family trees and the synchronicities into the Process Church of the Final Judgment, which is this kind of very shady cult organisation which had connections into Charles Manson and the Manson murders and such, and the Son of Sam murders of the 1970s. David Berkowitz was tied into that whole organisation. Then there's links into the Church of Satan, headed by Anton LaVey, which has always had a very strong public interface into the entertainment industry. So all this stuff going on, Satanism, paedophilia, military intelligence connections. Why should any of this stuff be cropping up time and time again when you look into the backstory of the music industry? Again, going back to what I was saying, if music is all about fun and entertainment, there's so much more to know. And it is devastating for people to discover this information. I absolutely get that. But you are either somebody that wants truth and goes wherever it takes them, you want to get down to the truth of a matter, or you're somebody that's happy to go on being deceived and, you know, bury your head in the sand and just pretend it's not happening. I guess people fall into one of those 2 camps, and I know which one I'm in.
And there you go. We'll go to a song at that point. That's awesome, man. So we'll be coming back from a song, and I guess the next thing I want to ask you about...
So the thing about the music industry and what happens with its key players and the level of control that is exerted, it is echoed in other areas of celebrity as well, as you mentioned just there. All the big sports players, all these celebrities that are on multi-billion-dollar or million-dollar at least salaries, they would all have been a part of this agenda. They've all been co-opted in exactly the same way. They've sold their souls, so to speak, because there's always a price to pay. You don't get to be somebody in that position without having made major compromises. I was going to use the word sacrifice, which might be a little more literal than people would accept in the circumstances. But all the big sports players, even in the fashion industry, all the top catwalk models, aside from those that are almost certainly mind controlled, when we get into trauma-based mind control and monarch programming and stuff that is absolutely endemic through that industry, as it is through the country music industry, which you mentioned earlier. But the high fashion industry, that's all a part of the agenda. All the big television stars, all the big TV show hosts, all the big kind of media figures, the news guys, and news women, they would all be a part of this same agenda. And, of course, Hollywood actors as well, big time. So it's the same agenda being played out in all these different facets of the entertainment industry. So what goes on in music is no different to what goes on elsewhere. And there are many whistleblowers from Hollywood and insiders over the years that have broken down exactly how that whole machine works. So, it's the same tactics being used. And, where do you want to go with it, man? In the book, I've got 20 different chapter subjects. I've got a chapter on mind-controlled artists. That's where we get into MK Ultra and trauma-based mind control and how that plays out.
Let's talk about that, because people don't understand what that is and what that's about. I mean, keep in mind, some people, I'm still like trying to get people over here to understand that Trump's an actor agent. Like Hillary's already selected by the, Bilderberg and the Rothschild. She's approved.
Of course.
This is just a theater of the absurd and the diabolical, just to distract people and
give them the illusion of choice.
The illusion
come
that
on
they
now.
have some say. Yeah.
Hillary and Trump. That's your choice? That's a choice?
Sorry, man.
How did it get this bad?
I'm ashamed, dude. I apologize for America. I apologize, man.
Well, it's no different over here, man. We've just got paedophiles running the show. And the worst thing about it is the British public know about this. It's actually in the public domain. It's been reported by the mainstream media that our political system is absolutely infested with child rapists. We had the whole Jimmy Savile thing, and how that connects into royalty even. Jimmy Savile was a friend of the royal family, close personal friend of Prince Charles. Prince Charles sent him a pair of gold cufflinks for his 80th birthday with the message engraved, "Dear Jimmy, no one will ever know what you've done for this country." How blatant do you want it? We had a former British Prime Minister, Edward Heath, that has been exposed in the mainstream media as back in the 1970s, sexually abusing and possibly murdering young boys. And yet the British public has just let it go. Nobody's up in arms about it. Nobody's mad about it. Nobody's talking about it at work. So don't apologise for America, man, because Britain is under just as high a level of mind control. It runs very deep. But yeah, we're going off at a tangent. You'd asked about MK Ultra mind control, which is absolutely prevalent throughout the industry. As I said, it's prevalent throughout Hollywood. And again, there have been many whistleblowers that have come forward and talked about how mind control works with Hollywood actors. Roseanne Barr has been very outspoken about that. There's a reason that not many people come forward and talk about this, because there are heavy risks involved. Your career is going to nosedive overnight for a start. And then there are all kinds of other fears for your personal safety if you start revealing all this stuff. So people shouldn't say, oh, well, Roseanne Barr's been talking about it, but who else is? She's a very brave individual that's laid out how this stuff works in Hollywood. And there are many, many others that I'm sure would like to come out and say the same thing, but they know that they can't because the price to pay is possibly too high. So the same thing happens in the music business. And when you get down to the research, you realise that many prominent A-list artists and household names are almost certainly the product of this very ugly, dark world of trauma-based mind control. And it's part of the MK Ultra program that came out of the CIA at the very end of the Second World War, when the OSS, the forerunner of the CIA, was involved in bringing over many prominent Nazi scientists that had worked during the Second World War in some of the concentration camps in Germany on various methods of literally controlling people's minds. And these people were covertly smuggled into the US and Central and Southern America, and they weren't punished or tried for war crimes. Instead, they were put to work in laboratories and institutions on behalf of the CIA to continue these programs, looking into how to shatter and completely dominate the human mind. And one aspect of MK Ultra, which is this massive overall operation, MK Ultra is kind of a catch-all term for all the different facets of it, and it involved the LSD, all the stuff that was getting put out, all the psychedelics that were getting put out into the youth at the tail end of the 1960s with Dr. Timothy Leary, who was a stated CIA asset. He admitted to that towards the end of his life. You know, he was working on behalf of the CIA when he was popularising LSD and getting all these kids to trip out and fry their brains on acid and get into all this freaky music that was around at the time. That was all a part of MK Ultra. It's all to do with manufacturing social attitudes and affecting the thoughts and the perceptions of large numbers of people on a mass scale. And coming out of that program also was an aspect where they would program Manchurian Candidate style assassins. So I'm sure people are familiar with the movie Manchurian Candidate. The thing about a lot of these classic Hollywood movies is they're presented as fiction, just this wild story, this stuff of fantasy, but what they're really doing is giving you a depiction of what actually goes on in regular everyday life behind the scenes, and they dress it up as a Hollywood movie so that they've got plausible deniability. If ever a researcher comes forward and says, hey, this stuff is really going on, you know, out of the CIA, they can turn around and say, it's just a movie, mate, you know, you need to get out a bit more because you're living in a fantasy world. But they are telling you the truth right there in these movies as to what goes on. So Manchurian Candidate style assassins happen all the time, and we have the likes of Lee Harvey Oswald and Mark Chapman and Sirhan Sirhan and John Hinckley and all these other names. What's his name? James Holmes from the Aurora Batman shootings, and Adam Lanza from Sandy Hook. You know, that they all offer the same indications and the same sort of traits and the same suggestions that they've come out of some form of mind control programming. And then you get down to some of your favourite artists, and they've got this division of MK Ultra known as Monarch Programming, and there's also an offshoot called Beta Programming, which is all about programming sex kittens as sex slaves to the rich and famous. But when it comes to Monarch Programming, what they've done with a large number of artists and Hollywood actors over the years is they've subjected them to these horrific methods of ritual abuse, usually from childhood, because they get these people very young. A lot of them come out of families where there's this long-running history in these family bloodlines of the children being abused from a very early age, and then they set these people to use in later life in various aspects of society. They stick them into the Hollywood scene, or they make a musician out of them, or they make some kind of celebrity out of them so that they're in the public eye, so that they can be doing their work, you know, conforming to the agenda and getting into the minds of the masses, of the people. And in the music industry, there's evidence to suggest that a large number of artists have been victim to this. A classic example would be Britney Spears, and she's the one that's usually cited because the signs are so obvious. So when she went off the rails a few years ago and went a bit crazy and shaved off all her hair in that hair salon and started attacking cars with umbrellas and stuff, that was an absolute surefire indicator of the mind control programming breaking down, and she needed to be put back into the lab very quickly and have a new dose of programming applied. Mariah Carey, to my mind, has always been another one. There have been aspects in her life where she's become very kind of unpredictable and irrational and gone off the rails. There was a story in 2001, just leading up to the events of 9/11, where she's said to have suffered a nervous breakdown and she attempted suicide. And whenever you hear of this sort of thing happening with celebrities, it's a surefire indicator that there's something going on in terms of mind control programming. Just thinking of actors, actresses, Lindsay Lohan, you know, how many stories have we had about her just going a bit crazy and going mad and having to go into rehab? It's another absolute sheer indicator of what's going on with her. Justin Bieber has been acting very erratic and very strange, and he's been in and out of some scrape or other with the law, and you know, all these crazy things he's been involved with recently. They're all signs of these people just not being in control of their own behaviours, because when they have this traumatic ritual abuse done to them, it causes the human mind to shatter into different compartments because it's too much for them to cope with the trauma that they're undergoing. And these scientists, you know, going way back to the Second World War, but it goes into many ancient civilizations as well. It goes right back to ancient Egypt and ancient Babylon in terms of how long this stuff has been going on. They discovered that when you subject a human mind to a certain level of horrific trauma, because it can't cope with the situation, it disassociates from reality. And it just wants to push the trauma into the back of the mind where it doesn't have to be processed and it doesn't have to be experienced. And they realised that the mind creates these different sections or alters, and that each of these can be programmed with a different personality. And these personalities can be called forward at will by way of triggers, trigger phrases, or colours or patterns or symbols or pieces of music, and they can bring forward these alters and then tuck them back into the recesses of the mind as they choose. And so a really good mind control scientist knows exactly how to achieve these things. And that's what's been happening with many prominent artists through the ages and other celebrities. And they do this because they want to be absolutely in control of them. They pick their favourites and they want them to conform to the agenda. They want them singing certain songs. They want them doing certain things in videos. They want them performing certain rituals in stage shows. They want them saying certain things in interviews. They want them throwing up certain hand signs and signals to indicate what they're really a part of. And it's far easier for them to have mind-controlled slaves that aren't in control of their own thoughts and their own actions than it is to have a kind of independent, creative, maverick spirit that is, in full control of their emotions and their actions. They like to be in control of everything, which is why they mind control many of their favourite stooges. So that's what's been going on. And they place little symbolic clues and indicators of this everywhere as well. So you see it in music videos, you see it in stage shows, you see it in record sleeves and promotional pictures, all these things pertaining to Monarch programming. We get Monarch butterflies everywhere. That very distinctive orange coloured butterfly is kind of an icon and a motif of Monarch programming. And when you are really paying attention and you look at a large number of pop videos of recent years, time and time again you see Monarch butterflies cropping up for no apparent reason. Another thing you see is teddy bears and dolls with broken limbs, so an arm missing or a leg missing or a patch over the eye. And that's another symbolic indicator of the presence of mind control, and that is symbolic of the childhood innocence of these people having been shattered, because they take them from a very early age when their subconscious is still being formed, and they absolutely corrupt and subvert and pervert things so that these people grow up to be, complete, twisted, distorted versions of what they would have been if left to develop of their own accord. And so that's why you see dolls everywhere and teddy bears everywhere, and you see smashed mirrors, broken mirrors everywhere in videos, huge amount of them. There's a website called VigilantCitizen.com where the guy breaks down all the symbolism and all the images that are going into these videos and all these photos and stuff, and explains what they all mean and how they all tie back into satanic ritual abuse, mind control, and Satanism and other dark occult rituals, which is going on all the time. People have no idea that this stuff is being absorbed by their subconscious minds every time they watch a music video, every time they watch a big stage show like the Grammys or the Super Bowl halftime show. These things are mass occult rituals on a huge scale. A global TV audience of billions is watching this stuff and absorbing all these images and taking it all in and having no idea that it's going on. They never miss a trick with these things. So it goes on all the time. And the trick to rising above it and it not having that effect on you anymore is getting alert and getting streetwise as to the tactics that are used, learning to spot the symbolism, learning to understand what these things mean. Because the minute they get out of the subconscious mind, which absorbs millions of pieces of information every second, and the conscious mind, which logically analyses things and makes sense of them, can't possibly deal with that amount of information. So it just brings through a very small proportion of all the stuff that the subconscious mind has absorbed and tries to analyse that and make sense of that. But all the rest of it stays lodged away in the subconscious mind, having an effect on the thoughts and the perceptions and the behaviours of the individual without them realising it's been shaped by forces that they can't see. So once you understand all this stuff, all the stuff I'm breaking down, all the stuff you can get from Vigilant Citizen and all these YouTube video makers and all these bloggers on the internet that have talked about this stuff, the minute you start spotting the symbols and understanding the way they're used is the minute it stops having that magic spell effect on you. You know, you've broken the illusion and you've taken back your mind and you can spot this stuff for what it really is. So very much the key to overcoming this dark spell that is being placed on us collectively is large numbers of people getting wise to all this stuff. So that's why I'm doing the work I do. That's why I've put the book out, and that's why I know there are a great many other people, radio show hosts such as yourself, YouTube video makers, you know, other speakers, researchers, authors, bloggers that are doing the same thing. You know, we're all on the same path. We all want humanity to snap out of its trance and start paying attention to what's being done to us.
And it's literally the simple difference between emphasizing light or shade, light or darkness, lightness or darkness. And it's amazing the shift that you've seen in the industry, because you can find pictures, and I've shared pictures in that album of the Beatles doing some of the hand signing and the gestures, but it's crazy out of hand now. Like, everyone's doing it. It's everywhere. If you Google, you'll just find thousands of pictures. And the ceremonies that you're talking about, the mass ceremonies, whether it's the Super Bowl or an award show, they're so lame. It's like, if you're going to do it, if that's the best you can do, please. Yeah. And every time the levitating girl, every time, whether it was The Weeknd at the Grammys or Britney Spears levitating or Rihanna's got to levitate. All right, we get it. Like, we get it.
Yeah.
We get it with your 33. We get it with your 59. We get your numerology. We get all the stuff that you're shoving in our face. Your one eye, your all-seeing eye.
Yep.
Please.
666 is everywhere.
But let's see you use it to do something creative with it. How about?
Yeah. I mean, this is a spiritual thing, and it's happening on a spiritual level. And it doesn't matter if somebody hearing that scoffs at it and laughs at it and says, that's a load of BS. I don't believe in all that stuff. You know, I'm not religious. I'm not spiritual. I'm grounded in the real world. Guess what? Anyone taking that kind of approach to this sort of thing, they're laughing at you. They love people like that. They love people to write this all off as coincidence or just one of those things. That's exactly the kind of public response they're relying on. Either people scoffing at it and laughing at it and just not accepting it, or people that just don't care. You know, they're either too dumb to see it, or even when they hear a hint of it and their conspiracy theory friend that they like to mock and take the piss out of, you know, might mention it to them, and they'll have a good old laugh at him and say, oh, that guy, he's always talking about his conspiracies. And then they go right back to watching these videos and, you know, going about their life and not giving it a second thought. That is exactly the kind of attitude that these dark controllers are relying on. And it's because of those attitudes that they've been able to get away with what they've been doing for so long. So it's happening on a spiritual level, and it doesn't matter who believes that and who doesn't, because it goes on being the truth anyway. There are truths in reality which go beyond what any one individual might think of them or not. You know, truth is truth, and there are spiritual laws in the universe. And we might not believe in them or choose to accept them, but best believe those controlling these industries do. They understand the nature of reality. They understand that this is not a solid physical world as it appears. They understand that everything in creation is energy vibrating at an endless array of different frequencies. And they understand that we, as humans, with free will consciousness, with that incredible gift that we've been endowed with by the creative force behind the universe, we actually have the power to shape and mould and create the type of reality that we experience. If you apply your will and your intent to a situation that you wish to manifest, you actually have the power to make that happen, because we're co-creators in this reality. with creation itself, and we're aspects of it. And so if you have a group of individuals, such as these networks of dark occult societies that are running the show, and all the key players in these groups are all focusing their thoughts, emotions, and actions together in that trinity towards a particular scenario that they wish to manifest, and they're all on track with it. They don't stray from the program. They're all constantly committed to the overall situation that they wish to bring about, and they perform these rituals. They get together at these various key points in the Earth's energy grid system, and they perform these rituals to bring about certain energetic states so that they can have a bearing on the type of reality that manifests. They're doing this stuff all the time, and they're very, very much on program with each other. And that's how they've been able to be so successful, and that's why they've got the entire world gripped in this satanic mindset which they revel in. And that's why all the stuff that we see going on in the world, from stuff in the entertainment industry, all these dark occult signs and symbols and all this stuff, to the situation that we have in the world at large, war and injustice and suffering and poverty and all of that, all these are states of being that have been brought about as a result of this small number of individuals just being absolutely committed to the type of reality that they want in this world, and applying their thoughts, emotions and actions to it, understanding that everything is energy, understanding the true nature of reality, and understanding that it can be manipulated, it's malleable, and it can be, changed according to will. Aleister Crowley, the famous British dark occultist, crops up time and time again in the story of the music industry on both sides of the Atlantic. So many artists through the years have expressed an absolute fascination with his works, and one of his key tenets was he talked about the art of causing change to occur in accordance with will. And it ties into exactly this same thing. You apply your will and your intent to a situation strongly enough and intensely enough, and you can actually bring that about. So the point here is we've got such a small number of individuals compared to the overall global population that have been dictating and directing and controlling events for far too long, many thousands of years. And when you get down to the numbers, it's probably a case of tens of thousands, no more than a few tens of thousands, controlling the lives of the remaining 7 billion people in this world. And they've been able to achieve it just by staying focused and all being on point and being on track and, working in tandem with each other and applying their will and their intent to a desired outcome. Now imagine the situation if large numbers, massive numbers of us were to wake up to what's going on and apply our will and our intent towards the type of experience that we want to have. An end to all this suffering and all this madness and all this injustice in the world and all these bloody rituals going on and all this satanic stuff. If we focused on a better future, a better experience for us, for our children, for our families, enjoying the abundance of life, enjoying connectedness with creation and all the incredible gifts that are right there for us in life if we choose them, if we want them enough. Imagine how quickly we could overwrite the version of reality that we've got and the version of reality that is held into place by all these rituals and all this stuff that's going on, and people just turning a blind eye to it and not accepting it. I feel we could turn the situation around very quickly and overwrite that very low level of consciousness that we've currently got around the world with a much higher level of consciousness in which some very different physical scenarios could emerge. That probably sounds a little deep and a little far out there for a lot of people, but it is the truth of the matter. And just going back to what I said at the start of all of that, it doesn't matter if you don't believe in spiritual laws of the universe. It doesn't matter if you don't accept that the nature of reality is energetic in nature. They do. They know this stuff, and they're laughing at you if you choose to reject it or say that it doesn't matter, because only facing up to this and resolving to make things better in our large numbers. Again, it's a case of waking up large numbers of people and getting them on track. That's the only way any of this is going to change. People say all the time, what's the way out of this? Where are the solutions? What do we do about it? Well, as far as I'm concerned, the only way it can happen is in consciousness, overwriting this version of reality with a better version. That's the only way it can be done. It can't be done physically, step by step, brick by brick, because the control system is too massive and too deep for it to be dismantled in that way. It has to happen at a much deeper level. So I hope that makes some sense.
Perfect sense from where we're sitting. I was fortunate to have a spirit guide for a few years, and one of his mantras was energy is everything.
Yeah.
And conserving our energy. He was big on that we're here to be of service to others. He's really deep in the Toltec, which is a lot of Native American. It's really the spirituality that most has resonated with me of all that I've looked at, because it's just, again, it's just truth. It's just basic. Just be cool. We're all on this planet. Don't be a fucking dick to other people around you.
Do no harm. That's the golden rule.
Take care of yourself. I'm sorry to be, pardon my French, but look at Trump. I mean, that's why I'm being rough with the language, because look at him.
A joke.
He is putting out the exact opposite intent and the exact opposite of anything that's vaguely classy, classic, tender, spiritual, evolved. And there's people in this country just reveling around it, and it's because it's a magnifying glass, And when I have people coming on my wall saying, "Oh, he's so cool," or this or that, just kind of getting off on him, how people used to get off on Howard Stern when he first came out, who's another shill,
Yeah.
And he wouldn't be where he is and is outspoken if not. And he came out with all that stuff, and people, especially the American culture, and I guess human nature, I don't know why people thrive on negativity and darkness and putting other people down. And,
yeah,
they love to build the celebrities up real high, and they love just as much to see them fall. But then everyone loves a great redemption story.
It's a satanic mindset, and they've manipulated humanity into that being the default kind of setting for people. And Satanism is not what a lot of people think it is. Leaving aside the sort of Christian religious viewpoint of what Satanism is all about, worship of the devil and all of that. Satanism, when you really get down to it, is all about service to self. Utter selfishness, appeasing your ego, staying grounded in base consciousness and the whims and desires of your physical self, completely cut off from your spirituality, from your true nature. It's what suits me right now in my life, in my circumstances. To hell with everyone else, to hell with how my actions might impact on others. Not giving a second thought to anyone other than yourself. Me, all day long. And, if we're honest about it, that is most people in the world. Most people's thoughts.
It's narcissism on blast. On full blast.
And they love it. These controllers love it because they've got the majority of people, 95% plus, I would say. Maybe I'm even being naive in that figure. In that kind of mindset all day, every day. And that absolutely suits their plans, because it's as far away from do no harm and do not treat others in a way you would wish not to be treated yourself as you can get. Do no harm is the golden rule of natural law, universal law. That's the rule we should all be following. And if everyone in the world was living their life and structuring their thoughts, emotions and actions according to that principle, we would have a very different world to the one that we're currently living in. And yet humanity has been manipulated and mind-controlled towards the exact polar opposite of that tenet, which is bugger everyone else, I'm getting mine. And it's even worshipped, it's even rewarded. It's certainly rewarded in the world of business. If you're someone that's ruthless and you don't care who you trample over on your way to the top, you have power in mind and you're going to achieve it no matter what, you get rewarded. You get rewarded with a big job title and a big salary and a nice house and a yacht. That sort of thing is rewarded in society, the satanic mindset. So that's what's got to change. And it might seem like an unsurmountable object, but every process has to start somewhere. This dark control process that we've got now had its roots somewhere. It started somewhere. It gained its power from one single point. And the old adage is, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So if we want to change the consciousness of this world, and if we want a better reality for ourselves, we shouldn't be thinking it can't be done, the immovable object is too big, why even try? No, you've got to take the view that it starts here, and we're the generation that's going to make it happen. If not you, then who? If not now, then when? Anyone listening to this is as good as anyone else as a participant in that process, and right now, at this moment, is as good a time to start as any. And actually, the last phrase in my book, the very last sentence on the last page is, only one question remains, therefore. How much do we want it? That's the phrase that I leave readers with.
And I'm going to a song right there. And then we'll come back and you've given me a whole bunch. Let's just come back and kind of wrap up and direct people to your books and your links. And
sure.
I think this is going to be awesome. I'm riveted. I could go on all day.
Well, yeah, I'd love to, man. I'll have to wrap it up here for today.
Dishing out soup. I'm dishing out music that hopefully is a frequency that'll accomplish everything that you and I are talking about. And spreading a little bit of truth every week, like you and I are today, that hopefully will accomplish just a little bit of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, a point that I often make at the end of these interviews is a lot of this information can seem very dark, and people could leave with the impression that things are pretty hopeless and now I can't listen to a whole bunch of the music that I used to enjoy because these artists are a part of this agenda. And that's absolutely not the case. I mean, I still love listening to music. I'm still a music guy, as I know you are. And it is simply a case of understanding what's being done and then making conscious choices based on that. So, for instance, one of my favourite tracks has always been Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. I'm mainly a hip-hop guy and a black music guy, but I love that record. It's a classic. And I've done some studies into it, and almost certainly there's some stuff going on beneath the surface in terms of the recording of that track, hidden messages in reverse, hinting at, dark occult practices, Satanism and stuff. But it doesn't mean you can't continue to enjoy that record, because it's a great song. And all it takes is just being aware of the fact that there could be stuff happening beneath the surface and getting out of the subconscious mind where it can have that mind-controlling effect and into the conscious mind. So you're listening to that piece of music and you think, okay, I know there's some stuff about Led Zeppelin. I know they were very much into Satanism and the occult, but hey, this is just a great song and I'm jamming to it and I'm enjoying it because I like music. So I'm not saying to anyone you have to stop listening to music. I'm just saying you do need to be aware of what it's being used for and stop letting it control you on that subconscious level. So on that note, I'd just like to pretty much wrap things up. Everything I've spoken about today and a whole lot more is in my book. So Musical Truth is 5 years worth of research. It's everything I've come to understand about the tactics that have been employed in the corporate music industry since the start, pretty much, on both sides of the Atlantic. So we're getting into mind-controlled artists, the links to transhumanism, the systematic degeneration of hip-hop culture. There's stuff there on ritual sacrifice, demonic possession, sound frequencies, the early days of the industry. There's specific chapters on the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and particularly Paul McCartney, and a whole load of other stuff. The last two chapters are putting it all into the context of the nature of reality, how all this stuff has been possible. What this reality is, what human consciousness is, how natural law works, what free will consciousness is and how we can apply all that to take back our power. So the last couple of chapters are very important for people to take on board, I would suggest. And the book is available via Amazon, so you can get it easily from Amazon.com. Just do a search for Mark Devlin, Musical Truth. There's a printed version. There's also a Kindle version for those that prefer, the digital version. And there's going to be a hardback version coming soon as well. I'm going to be coming over to the US next month, April. I'm going to be appearing at the Free Your Mind 4 conference, which is just outside Philadelphia. It's in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, and it's over the weekend of the 15th to the 17th of April. So I'm very honoured to be a featured speaker there, and there's some great speakers on the bill otherwise. Jordan Maxwell is headlining. There's Mary Sean Young, who's a former Hollywood actress turned whistleblower. Jim Mars is going to be there. Mark Passio, Jay Parker, Kathy O'Brien, Jamie Hanshaw and Freeman, Laura Eisenhower. So many other people. Max Egan, Ken O'Keefe has just been added. So it's going to be an incredible event. So anyone that can get to that, details are at freeyourmindconference.com. That's mid-April. Just outside there in Philly. And other than that, if anyone wants to make contact with me, you can get hold of me via markdevlin.co.uk. There's some further information about the book at musicaltruthbook.com. I am offering to mail out signed copies of the book to anyone that wants to purchase one from me direct via PayPal. So if people don't like Amazon, they're not the most ethical company in the world, and a lot of people don't like buying through them. So if people want to contact me direct via mark at markdevlin.co.uk, I'm happy to mail out signed copies. Obviously there's international postage costs involved if it's the US, but if people are happy to do that, then we can sort it out. So anyone is free to email me about that. Once again, it's mark at markdevlin.co.uk, and I look forward to corresponding with a whole bunch of people. And I want to thank you for getting me on, Jeff, and I hope that we can do this again sometime.